FAIRtax is coming, don't stand in the way. FAIRtax is coming across the USA. FAIRtax is coming, clean up this mess. We got to get rid of the IRS. Hey, hey! Hey, hey! On April 15th, when you're all out of sorts, you got to listen.
Hello and welcome once again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
And we are the FAIRtax guys. And this is part 2 of Bob gets to have some fun with Ron here. We're going to continue. If you missed the last episode, number 20, you really need to go back and check it out. We're going through a series of episodes here where we are taking some of the criticisms that are out there in the field about the FAIRtax and refuting them with the truth.
Yep. And, you know, it may seem like Bob is really getting into this, and you might be doubting how much of a FAIRtax fan he is, but he really is. Don't let his role playing get confuse you with the fact that he is an ardent supporter of the FAIRtax. Very knowledgeable. This is just an entertaining way to bring about these things.
Yes, an IRA radio professional can get into character here.
Well, we found that out when you were doing the Rod Serling thing.
Oh, that was fun.
Yeah, it sounded like it.
Okay, but before we get going, let's we haven't been touching on this too much in our past several episodes, how people can get in touch with us. The FAIRtaxGuys@gmail.com. That's our email address. Plus, we've got a Facebook page as well. Elaborate on that.
Just go to Facebook and type in the FAIRtax Guys, and boing, our FAIRtax page opens up. FAIRtax Guys Facebook page opens up. And you can post a question there, or like Bob said, you can email it directly to us. I try to update our Facebook page usually daily with something new and novel to keep everybody informed. One thing that we'll mention is the monthly webinar. When that's about to come up, I put a post on that up there with a link so you can register. The webinar is an interactive webinar, and it's free. It's something you should take a look at. But yeah, our Facebook page is just another way of reaching out to people.
Yeah, and we very much appreciate and value your feedback, good, bad, or indifferent. If you've got a question about the FAIRtax, we'd really love to tackle some of those. Chances are really good we know the answer, but if you can stump us with one, we've got quite a number of experts that we can turn to, and we can get you an answer to just any question you can raise on the FAIRtax.
Yeah, absolutely, because within our organization, state and national, we've got some really knowledgeable people. If you listen to the episodes with the interview with Steve Hayes, you know that Steve has been at this a long time, since before there was an Americans for Fair Taxation, and he has been asked all the questions, and he has the answer. And he's been out there talking to people, Steve Forbes, Congress people, so forth, all kinds of people. So he's very knowledgeable. And Dr. Karen Walby is researching tax and economic policy is her job. She's extremely knowledgeable.
Okay. Well, that's all the break you get here. I'm fixing to sling some at you. So you ready to go?
Here we go.
All right, here we go. All right, now you keep telling us that this FAIRtax rate's 23%. Of course, it's actually 30%. We won't mess with that right now. But anyway, that's not enough. It has got to be higher than that, because you have got to have exceptions for basic necessities.
Well, we have talked about this, but this is another way of talking about the prebate. Okay, the basic necessities. Yes, you don't want people to pay taxes, a sales tax, on what it costs to stay alive. We agree with that, and so that's why we came up with the prebate. The prebate is designed to make sure that everybody, not just the poor, but everybody, gets reimbursed for the FAIRtax on the basic necessities of life: food, clothing, shelter, basic med care, and so forth. All right, and that's what the prebate does, and we're not going to belabor that any longer. But we don't want people to pay the FAIRtax on the basic necessities of life. However, with that in mind, the initial research, the $20 million worth of research, included, well, what does the fair tax rate have to be when we count this Prebait thing in? And, how much do we have to tax people to sustain the current levels of spending in the federal government? So all that research was done a long time ago, and that's where they came up with 23%. And there's one more other thing. People say, wow, when the economy changes, that rate is going to have to change. A spending basis on spending is more stable than the basis on income. All right. In other words, the tax basis. Spending changes much less during economic downturn than income does. So going to a fair tax, which is based on consumption, is much more stable than the income tax, even in every type of economy. So that's another reason to go with a fair tax. And 23% is it. Research has shown it. It may change down to 22 point something and up to a little bit, but there's not much of a difference there.
All right. Now, here's a huge flaw that you fair tax folks don't like to talk about much. The fair tax will tax services. Now, if this thing passes, that means every service provider you deal with, from your doctor to your lawn maintenance guy, are all going to have to start charging you a tax that you're not currently being charged on those services. Two things are going to happen. It's going to be a terrible, terrible inconvenience to the service providers to have to do that, and it will send the cost of services skyrocketing.
Well, let's keep in mind that every service provider right now has a number of embedded costs, whether it's the lawn maintenance guy who has a one-person business, all right, that person still has to pay income tax. They still have to keep track of, they get deductions for cost of doing business, all right, which they have to keep track of. They probably have to pay an accountant to help them with their annual tax business, whether they're an LLC or S Corp or something like that. They have embedded costs. Everything that they buy has embedded costs due to the current tax system. So a lot of those embedded costs get reduced by 80-90%. So their cost of doing business is going to drop dramatically because of that. All right. What else? Well, if it is a larger company and they have people on the payroll, well, they don't have to have that expensive payroll service or software, or however they do it, to calculate the payroll deductions, because there will be no federal payroll deductions. So that's going to save them some money, and everything else that's involved with the fair tax just makes it easier for a business to do business. As we have mentioned before, the compliance costs for small business people is usually 7 times greater than the actual tax itself. 7 times greater. That's wildly inefficient. All right, so we're going to make it simple for these business people, and we're going to reduce the cost of doing business for them. We're going to simplify their record keeping. We're going to simplify their reporting also. So they're going to spend a lot less on non-productive expenses, and they're going to be able to put that money into their business. Buy a better lawnmower, give employee raises, whatever. They're going to make it a better business because we are going to make it simpler and less expensive for them to do business.
All right, Hotshot. What's to stop Congress from raising the rate?
Us. Okay, we the people. Now, that is the one thing that Congress can do. They can vote to change the fair tax rate. But 2 things. It'll be very public if they do. It's the only thing they do. I mean, think about the current tax system. We have changes almost daily. Almost every day that Congress is in session, on average, there's some kind of change to the tax system. How many of those do you hear about? Come on, Ebenezer, tell me. How many of those daily changes, do you hear about?
Not very many.
Yeah, not very many, okay? But when the one thing that Congress can do when the fair tax becomes law is change the rate, all right? we are going to know about it. And here's the other thing. When they do change the rate, they can't play favorites. All right? They cannot play favorites like they do now. They can't conduct class warfare via the tax code. If they change the rate, they change it on everybody. The middle class, the wealthy, the lower income group, they change it on everybody. And some of these Congress folks, they really like to play one group against the other. They can't do that with a fair tax. That tool is taken away from their toolbox. And so it's going to make it much more difficult for Congress to mess around with the tax code. That way, they can concentrate on spending issues, which is a grave concern. So, yeah, the Congress can change the rate, but one, we will know about it, and two, they can't play favorites when they do it.
All right. Well, listen, I do not trust the government. I mean, they would spend everything they've got and then some if we let them. So there is no way on God's green earth I'm going to let them put a sales tax on top of the income tax we've already got. I'm just not going to let them have both.
Yeah, well, I agree with that. You cannot give Congress the authority to tax sales and income tax because we know the way that story goes, and it's not very pretty. Okay, in fact, they did that in Europe. They said, well, if we get this VAT tax, VAT, value-added tax, then we can reduce your income tax. So in Europe, they have a VAT tax, which is kind of like a backdoor sales tax. And did they reduce the income tax? No, they didn't. Ask the folks from Europe. In fact, I remember when I was very new to the fair tax, and I was helping Nick and Barb Rudlick do a fair tax event in a nearby locality. And there was a lady from the UK that came up to me, and she wagged her finger at me. I'm from the UK, so this doesn't apply to me, but don't let them change get a sales tax and an income tax, because they did that to us in Europe, and it's not better. So you're right, we cannot. Now, how are we going to do that? The fair tax is contingent on the repeal of the 16th Amendment. Now, yes, the repeal of an amendment...
What's that? What's the 16th Amendment?
The 16th Amendment was that horrible amendment to the Constitution 102 years ago that gave the Congress the authority to tax income. That's right. We had to have an amendment to the Constitution to let them do that, which meant the Founding Fathers didn't want it in there. So the 16th Amendment allows Congress to tax income. Bad idea. That amendment must be repealed. And yes, by the Constitution, the states have up to 7 years to ratify that repeal. That doesn't mean that it will necessarily take 7 years. It could. I don't see it taking 7 years. I don't see it taking 7 months to repeal the 16th Amendment. All right? But the repeal of the 16th Amendment must go through. Now, it is written, if you read the legislation, which is only 133 pages, if the 16th Amendment is not repealed after 7 years, then the fair tax goes away and we go back to the income tax. Who wants to do that? I mean, after several years on the fair tax, with the economy roaring, jobs created all over the place, who's going to want to go back to the old system? Nobody, except maybe a few old Congress people that we need to get rid of.
Oh, mercy. Okay. But listen, out of control entitlement spending has got us on a fast track to the poorhouse. The last thing we need in this country is another entitlement, which is what this Prebait thing sounds like.
Well, I remember when I had the radio partner, Bob Paxton, telling me that the Prebait is really like a refund. Yeah, if you file your taxes and you found out you paid too many taxes over the past year, you get a refund. Well, that's pretty much what the Prebait is. We do not want to put a sales tax, the fair tax, on the basic necessities of life. So we're going to refund it to you at the beginning of the month, once a month, instead of waiting until the end of the year. So think of the Prebait as a monthly refund on the sales tax that you should not be paying on the basic necessities of life. which is, and we've talked about this before with the prebate, and it's important that we talk about the prebate a lot because it is the key to fairness in the fair tax. So the prebate is not an entitlement. It is there to make sure that everybody, not just the poor, but everybody does not pay the fair tax on the basic necessities of life. As I've said before, when the fair tax becomes law, everybody pays the fair tax, everybody gets the prebate. It is fair, and that's the way it should be.
But doesn't it come out of somebody else's pocket?
The cost of the prebate is a cost of doing business for the federal government, but if you compare it to the current exemption, the family exemption or whatever, which is, I don't know, it amounts to like almost twice what the prebate will be. All right, we're going to get rid of the income tax. We're going to get rid of all the nonsense around the income tax. We're going to get rid of all the exemptions, deductions, and so forth, including the standard deduction. All that's going away. So the prebate is really nothing compared to what the income tax has embedded in it now, is if you want to call it a cost of doing business for the government. So no, it's not going to be a big deal, and it's going to be easy to do because it'll be done electronically. That's done by many, many households right now. Social Security check, like Bob and I get, any other kind of benefit, it's usually done electronically.
Okay, now wait a minute. I've heard you use the phrase tax refund. Are you telling me that this prebate is just giving people back their own money?
Well, strange as it may seem, yeah, that's what it is. Because when you go to the store, you will pay the fair tax on everything: food, clothing, rent, buying a house, whatever. It'll be embedded into your rent and so forth. Yeah, the fair tax is going to be added to everything. But, as again, and I sound like a broken record here, because we don't want to anybody to pay the fair tax on the basic necessities of life, we're going to refund it to you. It's the simplest way, because otherwise, how are we going to make sure that people don't pay the fair tax on the basic necessities? Are we going to exempt certain things in the grocery store? Are we going to exempt rent or mortgage payments? Now, that is prone to a lot of abuse and fraud. Are we going to give poor people a card that says, I'm poor and I don't want to pay the fair tax? No, that is also prone to abuse and fraud. No, the simplest way to do it, since the government knows the basic, the poverty line, and it like for a family of four, it's between $31,000 and $32,000 to maintain that family. We're going to just reimburse them on the fair tax that they will be paying on the basic necessities at the beginning of the month, hence the name prebate.
Okay, you hard-hearted son of a gun. Listen, we've got enough problem with unemployment in this country. If you pass this fair tax thing, you're going to abolish the IRS. You're going to put hundreds of thousands of people out of work. All the people that work for the IRS, the H&R Block folks, CPAs. I mean, that's just no good at all.
Well, and, I mentioned before that I do taxes on my computer. I buy the software, and that software well, you know what? That software company, they're getting themselves into other things besides doing tax software. I'm not going to give an ad for these folks, but they make loans. They have accounting software. They do other things. IRS employees. No, I don't like the idea of putting people out of work, but written into the fair tax bill, the IRS will be given short of 3 years to finish up their current work. In other words, we're saying, let's say that the fair tax goes into effect January 1st. Well, everybody who owes income tax up through December 31st needs to pay it. So the IRS is going to stick around to make sure that gets done, because we're not just going to, forget about the income tax just like that. So the IRS is going to be around for up to 3 years to finish up their current work. That will give them 3 years to find another job. All right, and it's the government. All right, people who are near retirement, they can retire. People who are skillful in other fields, they can go ahead and get another job. Then you have to, and I've also had CPAs in my workshops saying, we really like the idea of the fair tax. We hate the current income tax. We don't like signing our name saying that we understand all 70-something thousand pages of the tax code. Yeah, we like the fair tax. Then there's the other side of it. The economy. What's going to happen to the economy under the fair tax? We talked about this at length. When you get rid of the corporate income tax, you are going to create a tax haven in this country. We are going to be the tax haven on the planet. We are going to be the only country without a corporate tax rate. What do you think corporations are going to do? Overseas corporations. They are going to flock to these shores. They're going to open up offices and plants here. Some of them will move their headquarters here. Right now, we're doing the opposite. We're chasing companies away because of our tax code. We are chasing them, jobs and corporations offshore. With the fair tax, we're going to reverse that trend and bring it back. Not to mention the trillions of dollars of American money that's overseas that's not coming back because of the income tax. So we are going to reverse the trend. We are going to grow the economy. As a friend of mine says, there'll be so many jobs created in this country when the fair tax becomes law, you will have to chain yourself to your bed to keep from getting a job.
All right, one more thing here, Hotshot. My best friend is a realtor. He says the fair tax is a horrible idea because it will get rid of the home mortgage interest deduction.
No, quite the opposite. We're going to give him 100% deduction for his mortgage payments. Yeah, in other words, we're going to make sure that there's nothing to deduct it from. What if you filled out your income tax and you said, my income was zero? There's nothing to deduct from it if your income is zero. How about if your income tax is zero? All right? How about if we make it, no matter what your income is, go earn as much as you want. Work as hard as you want. Work as little as you want. That's your business. But your income tax will be zero. And since the income tax is going to be zero, there'll be nothing to deduct your home mortgage thing from. All right? Your home mortgage deduction. My wife uses the example, that argument is like going into the grocery store, finding out that they're giving away free bread, and you're upset because you've got a 10-cent coupon on bread that you wanted to cash in, all right? Take the free bread and get out of there, all right? The fair tax is going to make it so that there will be nothing to deduct the mortgage interest or any other deduction. There'll be nothing to deduct it from. The income tax goes away. And Mr. Real Estate Agent really ought to understand that.
All right. Good job today. You deflected a lot of bullets. So now that we have people thoroughly convinced that all of the arguments are a lot of them are just based in myth and not truth at all, that how do we get folks involved and get their light a fire under their Congress critters to make this fair tax happen?
One of the things you can do is call your congressman or congresswoman. If you listen to our interview with Steve Hayes, you know that, and we've talked to other people, a call to their office, whether it be the home office or their Washington office, go onto their website, find out their phone number, and call them up and say, we want Congressman Smith to co-sponsor the fair tax, wherever you live. Now, where Bob and I live, we happen to be in districts in which our congresspeople are co-sponsors of the fair tax, and they're good supporters. So we call them up, and we make sure that they understand our appreciation. We are very happy that Congressman Smith or Congresswoman Jones is a co-sponsor of the fair tax. If not, if you live in an area, if you live in a district in which your congressperson is not a co-sponsor, call them up, call their office and tell them, I expect them to co-sponsor the fair tax. And if not, I want to know why. I vote and I count. That is one of the most effective ways. But what else can we do, Bob?
Oh, well, we cannot underestimate or overestimate, or however this works, say it wrong, is the importance of the 1040 Club. The 1040 Club is part of Americans for Fair Taxation. That's the national grassroots organization for it. And they have a program whereby if you would like to have the fair tax, you can pledge to donate $10.40 a month in honor of the forum that's going to be tossed on the scrap heap of history when this thing goes down.
Yeah.
And that is to maintain we don't have a lot of expenses, because a lot of the people that work in the fair tax movement are volunteers. But we do have some daily expenses that have to be taken care of if we're going to continue to operate. And a lot of that involves keeping our presence in Washington and actually horse-collaring these Congress critters and keep filling their ear with the fair tax message. So we do need your help. We do need your membership. The 1040 Club would be great if you can do that. If you can't, you can still join AFFT for $5 or $10 a year. You decide how much your dues are going to be.
That's right.
But we do need your numbers, and we do need a bit of your financial support as well. Americans for Fair Taxation. And I would imagine that every state, I know Florida here has a state-level organization, and I think there are state-level organizations in every state in the country.
I believe so. And another thing, while you're on the fairtax.org website, after you make your contribution and join, sign up for Fair Tax Friday. All right? That's free. That's absolutely free. And it comes, of course, every Friday. It's an electronic newsletter, and it lets you know what's going on. We had, as I believe I mentioned, another new co-sponsor. All right? It'll let you know about that. It'll let you know about what's the latest news with the IRS, missing emails, and so forth, and other ways that the income tax is just way past its prime. Actually, it never had a prime. And other things about the fair tax. So sign up for Fair Tax Friday. And that's one of the things that, the day-to-day expenses, maintaining that database and sending out these periodic emails. That's part of the expense because we have to have big companies that do that type of thing work for us. And,
of course, we can't go off the air without mentioning PopVox.
PopVox is what a great website, POPVOX, popvox.com. If you haven't visited that yet, I encourage you to do so. Log in with your name and address. That way it knows what congressional district you're in, and it knows who your Congress representative is and who your 2 state senators are. And then you can weigh in on any legislation that's pending, not just the fair tax, any pending legislation. You can go into that particular legislation, say, I'm in favor of this legislation, I'm not in favor of this legislation, and you can write up why. Your responses will be on PopVox, and your responses will be sent to your congressmen and to states, federal senators. And you'll get a response from them. Every time I weigh in on a particular piece of legislation, I get a response from these folks. Mm-hmm. So PopVox is a very convenient way to weigh in on any legislation. But, of course, we want you to weigh in on H.R. 25 and S-155. Don't forget the Senate version.
Yeah, as Congressman Yoho said a while back when we were talking to him, it's not all that common for the Congress people themselves to be following this, but every last one of them has got staff.
Yep.
And you better believe that anything that is said on these social media things is brought to the attention of the congressperson, even if he is not directly monitoring it.
That's right. And by the way, Program 14 has that interview with Congressman Yoho. So that's another good one.
Amen. As always, we do like to encourage folks to send us fair tax questions, comments, at thefairtaxguys@gmail.com. Log on to our Fair Tax Guys Facebook page as well. You can leave a comment. In fact, if you've got a story, we'd love to hear some horror stories about people that have dealt with the IRS. We got one from the parachute guy out there in Denellen a while back. It was just incredible. But we do like to have your feedback here, both through the email fairtaxguys@gmail.com, and the Facebook page as well.
And don't forget the monthly webinar. It's free. The easiest way to find out about that is go on to the fairtax.org Facebook page, and you'll find it posted there usually a couple weeks before. It's the 4th Thursday of every month. Free interactive webinar. Very important.
Okay, you have to register for it, but it doesn't cost just to log. They just send you some kind of login credentials, and then you log in and go for it.
Yep, and then 8 minutes before 8 o'clock, you click it in, and your computer logs in with them, and you hear Mark Maneri and Larry Walters.
All right. Well, that's just about going to wrap it up. Do it to it for this edition of FairTax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Ron Malero.
Reminding you the FairTax, once you understand it,
you will demand it.